Don't ask me how it happened, but I read 10 books this month. Hi everybody and welcome to the Mixtape Collective. My name is Ketty and I am creating new spaces in classical singing. I post videos about art, music, and literature, plus production news about all the great music that's happening in my life as a singer and entrepreneur. Today's video is my very first reading wrap-up. It is the end of January 2023 and somehow I read 10 books. Mostly I read a lot of fiction and fantasy, memoir. There's a lot of cozy reads that we can talk about. Plus I have a side branch interest in essays about feminist politics and ecology and climate change. Today, let's start with fiction. First up, Axiom's End. This is a really interesting first contact sci-fi novel. I would say sci-fi isn't my top #1 genre, but I think this is a really good example. Here is what it's about. It is fall 2007. I think the timeline setting is really interesting here. A well-timed leak has revealed that the US government might have engaged in first contact. Cora Sabino is doing everything she can to avoid the whole mess, since the force driving the controversy is her whistleblowing father. She neither knows nor cares whether her father's leaks are a hoax and wants nothing to do with him until she learns just how deeply entrenched her family is in the cover-up and that an extraterrestrial presence has been on Earth for decades. Lindsay Ellis has been a popular YouTuber for a long time, especially in video criticism. Her stuff is always funny and interesting and insightful, and I'm so glad I finally got to read her trilogy. Unfortunately, she was in the middle of book publicity and launching her first tour when COVID struck, so I think it stumbled a little bit in the market in ways that it didn't deserve, because this book is pretty cool. The politics, the linguistics, and the alien anatomy in this I think are really fleshed out and really well done. Thank you, Lindsay, for the clear amount of time and research that you did into this. Everything makes emotional and biological sense in a way that I think is hard to achieve and very cool. Also, I mentioned the timeline is interesting. This is set at the end of the Bush presidency, post 9/11, but before Obama. And the way that dovetails with the rise of conspiracy theories on the internet is incredibly interesting. And having her, the main character's father, as the whistleblower who is leaking government documents to the general public makes for a really interesting and tense ride. So I enjoyed this. I've got book #2 waiting in the wings. I'm not sure if I'll get to that next month, but great book. Next up was Foundryside, which I listened to on audiobook. Again, I'm super behind on this series. The third one in the trilogy was just released a couple months ago, but I'm so glad I finally caught up because I do think it's really worth it. Here's the blurb. Sanchia Grado is a thief, and a damn good one. But unbeknownst to her, Sanchia's been sent to steal an artifact of unimaginable power, an object that could revolutionize the magical technology known as scribing. The merchant houses who control this magic, the art of using coded commands to imbue everyday objects with sentience, have already used it to transform the city of Tevan into a vast, remorseless capitalist machine. But if they can unlock the artifact's secrets, they will rewrite the world itself to suit their aims. This book has like crazy plot escalation that I haven't seen in a long time. It's just an exciting fantasy that is also based in questions of ethics and reality and magical coding of a sorts, in which you convince objects to behave like other objects. If you tell a piece of wood that it's actually a rock, it gets harder. If you tell that piece of wood that it's actually clay, it gets softer. So all of that is great as a construct. It works in ways that are really interesting and logical and illogical, as if it really existed. It makes a lot of sense. I saw a lot of DNF reviews for this on Storygraph of people getting part way and stopping, and I've done that before. I've started this book twice in the past and it just didn't work, but this time I pushed through and it really, really pays off. I will say there's a slow start and then it really ramps up, and it has many, many, many of the tropes that I like. We've got a Venetian-inspired merchant class of the rich and powerful, fighting against a ragtag group of misfits taking on the world, and we've got enemies to allies, we've got to plan elaborate heists, we've got to release the old gods, oh no, we made a mistake, kill the old gods, free the slaves, pool all our resources to form open source coding libraries for the community to benefit. Like, it's amazing. I had to power through the end of this book on double speed because I was too excited, and it was due back to the library really soon on the Libby app where I get all my audio. So it was just a great ride. I'm already halfway through book 2. My library hold came in, and I'm so here to see what happens with the end of this series. Next up, New Spring by Robert Jordan. This is a prequel to the Wheel of Time series. I read the first 6 of those with some friends in a Discord server online during the pandemic, and I kind of fell off the wagon because the series is really interesting, but also it has really severe pacing problems. Interesting setup in the first 60 pages. Then there's this much riding around on horses and talking about stuff, wondering when they're gonna encounter the bad guys. And then the payoff is here. But I care about these characters and I want to know what's going on in their lives, so I'm trying to weigh if I should finish this 14-book series when I've read now 6.5 of them. So that's my life. So this book follows Moraine as she is receiving her Aes Sedai training, which if you have read any of the books or seen any of the show, you'll know that she's a very powerful magic user in this universe. So it's about her and her best friend Swan, Sancha, as they go through the training and are gay. Like, hello? Besties, roommates, colleagues, anything but lovers. History, it's a lover. Yeah. I enjoyed this as a sidestep outside the stream of the main series to kind of catch up with these people beforehand. I don't think any of the information in here is necessary for you to jump right in with the Wheel of Time as it stands. But it's good. Now let's move on to some cozy reads. First up was Skunk and Badger, which is, I would guess, a middle grade book by Amy Timberlake with these beautiful illustrations. Oh my goodness. Let me open up the inside flap and show you. This is our friend the badger, hard at work. He studies rocks and minerals. It's very sweet. To his great surprise, a skunk comes to stay at the house and be his roommate, but no one likes a skunk. So hijinks ensue. There are a lot of chickens running around. This book is weird and cute. I bought this for my partner Tom because badgers are like an inside joke in our house, and this was such a cute example. So we just had fun with this. It was a Christmas present and a cute little read to start off the year. Next up on my list of cozy wintertime January reads is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. If you've been around BookTube or BookTok for a little while, you've probably seen this mentioned as like the pinnacle of the cozy fantasy space. We'd call this a low stakes fantasy, and it's mostly about the relationships between the different characters as they set up a coffee shop. It's very cute. It will make you very hungry, like beautiful descriptions of cinnamon rolls, things baking, coffee brewing. I don't even like coffee that much, and I wanted some when I finished reading this book. It's absolutely charming. There's still a plot line because they're struggling to start this coffee shop in a town that's never even heard of coffee. So how do you get the message out? How do you find your first customers? Who do you trust with your new business model? How do you build the building? Just extremely charming and a great winter read. Next up, I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Nothing more needs to be said about this book. And yes, I know that J.K. Rowling is a monster, so let's not give her any more time. This book is a coping mechanism in my life, so I will always be grateful to them for existing, but we don't need to talk about their creator and the terrible things that she's doing in the world. So goodbye. And my final cozy read for January was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. This is about exactly what it sounds like, a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse who are a band of unusual friends who go on a quiet little adventure together. This book is more a series of illustrations. It's almost like a little fable about getting along and eating cake and taking care of one another, and it's just the sweetest thing I've ever seen. It took me maybe 20 minutes to read, tops, to just enjoy the pictures and flip through. Beautiful and cozy. Finally, here we are in the nonfiction section. The first book that I read was called Cinderella Company by Manuela Hoelterhoff, backstage at the opera with Cecilia Bartoli. As many of you know, I'm a professional opera singer and I work with classical singers as part of my job, so I was very interested to pick this up. The flap calls it a wickedly funny look at opera today. The feuds and deals, maestros and managers, divine voices and outsized egos, and a portrait of the opera world's newest superstar at a formative point in her life and career. This book is wild. I would call it medium bad. It's just a gossip about what's going on backstage at the Met. There's nothing about singing in here. Basically nothing. It's just a list of who canceled what gig and who said what about who. She also has a lot of harsh things to say about journalists and music critics, which is very interesting considering she is a journalist and music critic who won a Pulitzer for cultural criticism in 1983. It's very off the wall. I expected this to tie up better, and it does not. It's just kind of a summary of events that happened to the author as a fan of opera hanging out with singers over the span of a couple years while Cecilia Bartoli prepares to sing La Cenerentola at the Met and also in Houston, Texas. I have a lot more thoughts about this book and how we talk about music criticism, how we talk about artists, how we talk about artists' bodies as productions of themselves. There's a lot of questionable stuff in here, and I think it's a good representation of everything that I want my performance company to not be. Because this is purely focused on the drama and not actually on artistic content or expression or the purposes of music. It's mostly just a like trashy 90s tell-all. So this might be a separate video. Wow, I had a bad time with this and I flagged like a million things I want to talk about. So let's just table this for later. Ugh. Finally, I rounded out the month by reading 2 memoirs that are also graphic novels, which is a really interesting crossover. I love the way that this genre shows us so much about an artist's style while also telling us about the artist's life. It's a unique window into the artistic process and into the history of a human being. First up was The Secret to Superhuman Strength by Alison Bechdel. Yes, that Alison Bechdel of the Bechdel test and also the author of Fun Home and several other graphic novel comic memoirs. Her stuff is darkly funny, it's really beautiful and touching, and she writes so evocatively about her journey as a queer person in her own family and in society at large. Here in this book, she's specifically talking about her lifelong love of fitness activities of every single flavor. Running, yoga, anything you can possibly imagine. Lots of cross-country skiing happens in this book, especially when she moves to Vermont. But the blurb here says, this is a heartrendingly comic chronicle for our times as she goes through all these different things that she wants to try over decades. This story is set across the span of most of her life up to this current point. Quote, but the more Bechdel tries to improve herself, the more herself appears to be the thing in her way. This gifted artist and not getting any younger exerciser comes to a soulful conclusion. The secret to superhuman strength lies not in six-pack abs, but in something much less clearly defined, facing her own non-transcendent but all-important interdependence on others. I would recommend this book to pretty much anyone who has ever exercised or not exercised because yes, the sports gear and the thrill of activity is really central to this, but it's also just a meditation on what it means to be a human being. She tackles these big questions of embodiment and disembodiment, physical presence and emotional transcendence when you're suffering physically, but also experiencing a runner's high. She talks about Title IX, she talks about puberty and stretch marks, she talks about limitations, really, and transcendence, ultimately. But it's about the existential dread of being alive, and it's also a tribute to everyone who has climbed the mountain before us and paved the way, both in literary history and also in athleticism. So I thought this book was really beautiful. It's deep and it will need a second or third reading from me, and I think it will be interesting as I age to kind of return to certain chapters where she talks about just changes in the body that happen as a woman who grows old. And my second and final graphic memoir this month was Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands by Kate Beaton. Kate Beaton is a cartoonist and illustrator who I've loved for a long time. I followed her webcomic called Hark! A Vagrant for many, many years back when she was publishing that online. And this is her first memoir that she has released. Some of her comics are autobiographical, but this is a full-length book about a particular episode in her life. In this story, Kate has graduated from college with her arts degree, and it's a very common thing in her part of Canada, Eastern Canada, to go to Alberta and work in the oil sands, where oil companies refine crude oil out of the earth and process it and get it out to the rest of the country and the world. The blurb says, Kate encounters the harsh reality of life in the oil sands, where trauma is an everyday occurrence, yet is never discussed. Beaton's natural cartooning prowess is on full display as she draws colossal machinery and mammoth vehicles set against a sublime Albertan backdrop of wildlife, northern lights, and boreal forest. This is an untold story of Canada, a country that prides itself on its egalitarian ethos and natural beauty, while simultaneously exploiting both the riches of its land and the humanity of its people. This book is also a really beautiful and harrowing look at sexism in the workplace. Again, this is an oil mining company set out in the middle of nowhere where workers are on call for days and weeks at a time. And by virtue of being so isolated, it's also incredibly male-dominated and dangerous industry as a whole, and as one of the only women in the camp, she's a frequent target of sexism and assault. So big trigger warning for that, but the way she illustrates this and writes about it is so beautiful and profound. She's really speaking to not only her personal experience, but also the experience of all the others around her. So it's a very intense book, and it's all illustrated in tones of gray. So it has a bleakness about it that's wonderful and awful at the same time. And I can't say I enjoyed reading this because it's a pretty painful experience to go through. But I think it's so, so, so well done. So if you're interested in this topic at all, it's absolutely worth a read. Both of these graphic novels were big prize winners in the last couple years, so I would definitely recommend checking out both of them. And if you know of any other good graphic novel memoirs, let me know, because this is a genre that I'm really, really enjoying as a crossover of different things that I love. So if you know more, tell me. Phew, so that is my giant 10-book wrap-up for January. Thanks so much for being here and for joining me at the Mixtape Collective. I will see you around the concert hall or the library or the internet sometime. Have a great week.